The end does not begin with a trumpet. It begins with cold. Not one winter, but three. No spring between them. No thaw. No mercy. The rivers harden. The fields disappear beneath a white weight that never lifts. Hunger walks from house to house. Brothers turn on brothers. Oaths become fragile things. Somewhere beyond the frozen dark, the gods already know what is coming. This is Fimbulwinter, the winter before Ragnarok. But Ragnarok is not simply a battle. It is not just gods fighting monsters beneath a burning sky. It is a doom that has been spoken of long before it arrives. A future so powerful that even Odin, the wisest of the gods, cannot fully escape it. So we begin slowly at the edge of that cold. Imagine a world where the end is not a surprise but a prophecy. A world where every victory carries the shape of a future defeat. The gods of Asgard are mighty, but they are not eternal in the way we often imagine gods to be. They feast, they rule, they make bargains, they break them, and beneath all their glory lies a terrible knowledge. One day, the order they built will crack. The strange power of Ragnarok is that it does not treat destruction as an accident. It treats it almost like a debt. Before we venture further into the shadows, take a moment to subscribe, so you never miss a secret that history has tried to forget. Because tonight, we are not just following the fall of gods. We are following the story of a world that saw its ending coming and still had to walk toward it. Through snow, hunger, betrayal, and silence. Chapter 2. A fate the gods already know. To understand Ragnarok, we have to set aside one very modern expectation, that gods should be free. In many stories, divine beings stand above the rules that govern mortals. They command storms, reshape landscapes, raise heroes, punish enemies, and bend the world toward their will. But in the Norse imagination, the gods are powerful in a different, more troubling way. They can fight. They can scheme. They can delay disaster. They can gather knowledge from the oldest corners of creation. What they cannot do is step outside fate. That single idea gives Ragnarok its unusual weight. The gods are not stumbling blindly toward an unforeseen catastrophe. They are walking beneath a prophecy they have heard before. Odin, above all, knows that a final battle waits somewhere ahead. He knows that enemies are growing in the dark places of the world. He knows that the shining order of Asgard is not permanent. And this knowledge does not make him peaceful. It makes him restless. There is a quiet terror in knowing the shape of your ending, but not having the power to erase it. In the old Norse world, fate was not always imagined as a simple line drawn from birth to death. It was closer to a web of consequences, a pattern woven from choices, promises, bloodlines, insults, debts, and old violence. The gods act, and those actions matter. But their actions also seem to tighten the pattern around them. Every attempt to protect Asgard becomes part of the road that leads to its collapse. That is what makes the story more unsettling than a normal apocalypse. Ragnarok is not merely punishment from outside. It is not a random invasion by monsters who hated the gods for no reason. It grows from inside the divine order itself, from fear, from pride, from half-kept bargains, from the way power tries to control what it cannot understand. The gods look at prophecy and try to manage it, as rulers often do. They identify threats. They isolate them. They bind them. They bury the danger far from sight. But prophecy in these stories does not behave like a locked door. It behaves more like winter weather gathering beyond the mountains. You can prepare for it. You can fear it. You can pretend the sky is still clear, but the cold is already moving. This is especially true of Odin. He is not a foolish king. He is not careless. In many ways, he is the most alert figure in the mythic world. He searches for knowledge with a severity that can feel almost desperate. He listens to the dead. He consults prophecy. He sacrifices comfort, safety, even parts of himself, because he understands that ignorance is more dangerous than pain. And yet, the more Odin learns, the more trapped he becomes. That is one of the deepest ironies in the Ragnarok cycle. Knowledge does not liberate him. It burdens him. It gives him warnings but not escape. It allows him to see danger coming, but not to prevent the final hour from arriving. His wisdom becomes a kind of haunting. He can read the signs before others can, but the signs do not change because he has read them. There is something almost painfully human in that. Most people are not destroyed by things they never feared. More often, we are destroyed by the dangers we saw approaching, but could not fully stop. A family fracture, a political collapse, a sickness, a betrayal, a decision made too early and understood too late. Ragnarok turns that human experience into cosmic drama. It asks what courage means when success is not guaranteed. More than that, it asks what courage means when failure has already been foretold. This is why the gods do not feel like distant abstractions. They feel exposed. They continue to build halls, hold councils, make alliances, and train warriors. Valhalla fills with the heroic dead, chosen not for a victory that will save the world, but for a final stand whose outcome is already shadowed. That detail changes the meaning of the warrior paradise. It is not just reward. It is preparation. The dead are being gathered because Odin knows a day will come when every spear will be needed, even if every spear will not be enough. A lesser story might treat prophecy as decoration, a dramatic warning placed early so the ending feels grand. But in this mythic world, prophecy is the pressure beneath every decision. It turns triumph sour. It makes victory suspicious. When the gods defeat a threat, the listener is invited to wonder whether they have actually solved the problem, or merely shaped the enemy that will return later with greater force. That is the tragic intelligence of the story. The gods are not doomed because they are weak. They are doomed because strength, by itself, cannot free them from consequence. Odin can gather knowledge. Thor can crush giants. Tyr can make a terrible sacrifice. Heimdall can keep watch from the edge of heaven. But none of them can undo the structure of the world they inhabit. And this is where Ragnarok becomes more than an ending. It becomes a mirror. The old myths do not tell us that power is meaningless. They tell us that power has limits. They do not say wisdom is useless. They show that wisdom may reveal the truth without granting control over it. They do not mock courage. They preserve it, even when courage cannot change the final result. The gods know the storm is coming. They know the wolf is growing. They know the serpent waits beneath the sea. And still, Asgard shines for a while longer. That fragile pause, between prophecy and fulfillment, between warning and ruin, is where the whole story lives. Ragnarok is terrifying not because the gods are surprised by it, but because they are not. They hear the future breathing behind the walls of their golden halls, and they keep ruling anyway. Chapter 3. The fragile glory of Asgard. Before the world breaks, it must first appear whole. That is important. Ragnarok would not carry the same force if the gods lived in a ruined place from the beginning, surrounded only by ash and warning signs. The old Norse imagination gives us something more painful, a cosmos that works, at least for a time. A world with structure, boundaries, duties, roads between realms, fires in the halls, names for things, rules, even when the rules are strained. At the height of that order stands Asgard. It is tempting to picture Asgard only as a golden fortress in the sky, a clean and shining home for divine beings, safely removed from the confusion below. But the myths do not really give us a universe that simple. Asgard is magnificent, yes, but it is not untouchable. It has walls because walls are needed. It has watchmen because enemies exist. It has feasts because the gods enjoy power, but it also has councils, bargains, punishments, and fears. Its beauty is not the beauty of a place beyond danger. It is the beauty of a kingdom trying to hold danger back. Below it lies Midgard, the human world, encircled and exposed. That name matters. Midgard is the middle enclosure, the place in between. Humans do not live at the center because they are supreme. They live there because they are surrounded. Beyond the human realm are forces older, stranger, and less obedient than anything a king in Asgard can command. Giants, monsters, dead things, deep waters, hidden fires, and regions where divine authority becomes uncertain. The cosmos is not a neat pyramid with Odin sitting safely at the top. It is more like a tense settlement built in a wild landscape. And holding all of it together is Yggdrasil, the great world tree. Yggdrasil is one of the most haunting images in the Norse mythic imagination because it suggests connection without comfort. Its roots reach into deep places. Its branches extend across realms. It binds worlds together, but it also exposes them to one another. What happens in one place can tremble elsewhere. A wound in the roots is not just a private injury. It belongs to the whole structure. That is the first sign that the Norse cosmos is not truly stable. It is interconnected, yes. It is ordered, yes. But order is not the same as peace. The gods maintain a balance that was never guaranteed. They are not creating a perfect universe from nothing. They are occupying a dangerous one, shaping it where they can, defending it where they must, and sometimes pretending their control is greater than it really is. This is where many retellings flatten the story. They divide the mythic world into simple sides: gods as order, giants as chaos, monsters as evil. There is some truth in that broad pattern, but it is not enough. The giants are not merely nameless enemies waiting politely off stage until the gods need someone to fight. They belong to the deep ancestry of the cosmos. They are connected to knowledge, to wilderness, to old powers, to the unsettling memory that the gods themselves did not arrive in an empty world. The gods rule, but they do not own everything. That difference matters. Asgard's glory is therefore political as much as divine. It is a project. It must be maintained. Like all projects of power, it depends on borders, alliances, reputation, and the careful management of fear. Thor's hammer is not just a weapon. It is a guarantee that the boundary can still be defended. Heimdall's watch is not just a noble duty. It is an admission that something may come. Odin's wisdom is not simply a gift. It is a form of surveillance over a future that refuses to become safe. Seen this way, the world before Ragnarok is not calm. It is tense. Even the most splendid halls carry the feeling of a pause. The gods drink, boast, marry, quarrel, and judge. They seem permanent because they have the confidence of rulers who have won many times before. Yet around them gather the things they cannot fully absorb into their order. The wolf who grows too large, the serpent who cannot be contained on land, the dead who do not belong to heroic song, the trickster who is both inside and outside the family. Asgard's greatest weakness may be that it believes danger can be placed somewhere else. This is a very old habit of power. When a threat cannot be destroyed, it is exiled. When it cannot be understood, it is named monstrous. When it cannot be trusted, it is bound. The gods do this again and again, and at first, it looks like success. The world remains standing. The halls remain bright. The feasts continue. From the inside, perhaps, that is enough. But myth is patient. It remembers what rulers prefer to forget. A bound enemy is still an enemy. An exiled child is still part of the story. A prophecy ignored does not become harmless. The walls of Asgard may keep certain dangers out, but they cannot keep consequence out. And they certainly cannot keep out the failures already living within the divine household itself. That is why the glory of Asgard feels fragile rather than false. The myths do not ask us to despise the gods or dismiss their achievements. The order they defend is meaningful. Without it, the world would fall sooner. Human life needs boundaries. Fields need seasons. Oaths need force behind them. A realm without protection is not freedom. It is exposure. The gods, for all their flaws, stand between creation and a vast returning dark. But they also help create the shape that darkness will take. This is the uneasy brilliance of the Ragnarok story. It does not present civilization as worthless, nor does it pretend civilization is innocent. Asgard is worth mourning because it is beautiful. It is doomed because it is compromised. Its shining halls are not stage scenery waiting to be burned. They are the fragile achievement of beings who can win battles, build worlds, and still misunderstand the deepest rules of their own existence. For a while, the tree still stands, the gods still gather, the human world still turns beneath them, and somewhere beyond the defended borders, older forces wait, not always rushing, not always roaring, but enduring. The kind of forces that do not need to defeat glory immediately. They only need to outlast it. Chapter 4. Odin's Hunger for Forbidden Knowledge. Odin is often introduced as the All-Father, and the title can make him sound calm, complete, almost marble still in his authority. But the Odin who stands behind Ragnarok is not a comfortable patriarch. He is a ruler with one eye missing and too many answers. A god who understands that knowledge has a price and pays it anyway. A wanderer who does not seem satisfied with ordinary wisdom. He wants the kind that lies beneath the visible world, the kind that belongs to wells, graves, runes, dead voices, and beings older than the bright politics of Asgard. In the shadow of Ragnarok, Odin's wisdom does not feel like decoration. It feels like anxiety sharpened into a method. The most famous image is his sacrifice at Mimir's well. In later mythic tradition, Odin gives one of his eyes for a drink from the well, associated with deep wisdom. The bargain is stark, almost brutally simple. Sight in exchange for insight. He loses part of the world's surface so he can perceive something beneath it. That detail is not just memorable. It reveals the kind of god he is. Thor meets danger with a hammer. Odin meets danger by asking what the danger means. He wants origin, pattern, prophecy. He wants to know where threats begin, where they hide, how they might unfold. In a world governed by fate, this hunger makes sense. A ruler who cannot abolish destiny may still hope to read it early enough to delay its worst shape. Delay is one of Odin's great ambitions. Not victory in the simple, clean sense. Not escape. Delay. That may sound small for a god, but in the Norse imagination, it is enormous. To delay the end is to preserve the world for one more season, one more generation, one more feast, one more harvest in Midgard. It is to hold the line, even when the line is already marked for breaking. Odin's choices often look harsh because they are made under the pressure of a future he believes he has already glimpsed. And yet, this is where wisdom becomes morally dangerous. When someone knows or thinks he knows that a catastrophe is coming, almost anything can begin to seem necessary. Suspicion becomes prudence. Cruelty becomes strategy. Betrayal becomes the cost of survival. Odin's hunger for knowledge gives him depth, but it does not make him innocent. In some stories, he is a seeker. In others, he is a manipulator. Often, he is both at once. That doubleness is essential. A weaker version of the myth would make Odin either a noble king tragically defeated or a cold ruler punished for arrogance. The older material allows something more uneasy. Odin is wise, and his wisdom matters. He is also haunted, and haunted rulers can damage the very worlds they hope to save. This is the tragedy of foresight. To know too little is dangerous, because you walk unprepared into disaster. To know too much is dangerous, because you may start treating the present as nothing more than a battlefield for the future. The living become pieces on a board. Children become threats. A strange birth becomes a prophecy with teeth. A companion's flaw becomes an infection inside the hall. Odin watches for signs, and the signs are everywhere. The wolf Fenrir grows. The serpent coils beneath the sea. Hell rules over the dead. Loki's laughter begins to sound less like mischief and more like a crack in the beam above the feast. The giants remain outside the walls, but never far enough away. Every old enemy seems to carry a fragment of the final day. So Odin prepares. Valhalla is perhaps the clearest example of this preparation. The Great Hall is often imagined as a warrior's paradise, and in one sense, it is. The fallen are chosen, honored, gathered into divine company. But under the light of Ragnarok, Valhalla has another meaning. It is not merely a reward for bravery. It is a mustering ground. The dead are being trained for a war the gods know is coming. There is something chilling in that. Even glory has been recruited into prophecy. Even the heroic afterlife is shaped by fear of the final battle. The Einherjar, the chosen dead, feast and fight. But their existence points toward a day when the doors will open and they will march into a conflict that cannot be neatly won. Odin does not gather them because he expects an easy triumph. He gathers them because he refuses to meet doom empty-handed. That refusal is the core of his character. He may not be able to defeat fate, but he will not greet it passively. He will learn, bargain, sacrifice, deceive, and arm himself with every fragment of advantage he can find. There is dignity in that. There is also desperation. The myths seem to understand both. They do not present wisdom as a clean virtue. They present it as a force that changes the one who seeks it. Odin's missing eye is a permanent reminder that he has crossed a line most beings would not cross. He has chosen knowledge over wholeness. The wound is not incidental. It is the emblem of his reign. And perhaps this is why Odin feels so modern, despite the age of the stories. He resembles every leader, scholar, strategist, and frightened parent who has ever believed that if only they could know enough, they could protect what they love. If the pattern could be decoded, if the warning signs could be read, if the right sacrifice could be made at the right time, perhaps the disaster could be softened. Perhaps the prophecy would bend. But Ragnarok does not bend easily. The cruelest possibility is that Odin's knowledge helps bring about the very future he fears. Not because he is foolish, and not because prophecy tricks him in some simple way, but because fear shapes action. When he sees threats, he treats them as threats. When he treats them as threats, they become enemies. When they become enemies, the final war gains its soldiers. The wisdom that was meant to defend Asgard becomes part of Asgard's fate. This does not make Odin a villain. It makes him tragic in the oldest sense. Great enough to understand the danger, flawed enough to deepen it, brave enough to face the ending, and bound enough that even bravery cannot free him. So when we imagine him in the years before the end, we should not see only a king on a throne. We should see a figure listening to ravens, to prophecies, to the dead, to the tremor beneath the world tree, listening for the first sound of a chain beginning to fail, listening for the horn that has not yet been blown, listening perhaps to the silence where certainty should have been. Odin knows more than anyone, and still, the winter comes. Chapter 5. Loki, the wound inside Asgard. Loki is difficult to introduce cleanly, which is probably the most honest way to begin with him. He is not simply a villain, though later retellings often push him in that direction. He is not simply comic relief either, though some of his stories have the strange energy of a dangerous joke told too close to the fire. He belongs to the company of the gods, travels with them, solves their problems, creates several of them, and somehow remains both necessary and unwelcome. That is what makes him so dangerous. An enemy outside the walls can be watched. A giant at the border can be met with Thor's hammer. A serpent in the sea can be named, feared, and imagined at a distance. But Loki lives within the divine household. He eats with the gods. He knows their habits, their vanities, their weak points. He understands the social machinery of Asgard from the inside, because he has helped keep it moving, and sometimes he is the only reason it keeps moving at all. In many myths, Loki is the problem that becomes the solution. Through cunning, disguise, insult, improvisation, or sheer nerve, he finds a way out of impossible situations. He retrieves what is lost. He tricks those who have tricked the gods. He turns humiliation into advantage. If Thor represents force, Loki represents flexibility, the uncomfortable intelligence that respectable power often depends on but does not like to acknowledge. This is the first contradiction at the heart of him. Asgard needs Loki more than it wants to admit. That need creates an uneasy intimacy. The gods may distrust him, mock him, threaten him, or punish him, but again and again they allow him close. He is not a stranger wandering in from the wilderness. He is woven into the story of Asgard's success, the bright treasures, the narrow escapes, the restored order after disaster. Loki's fingerprints are often there, but help from Loki rarely comes without residue. His solutions tend to leave a stain, a complication, a future debt. He can rescue the moment while damaging the deeper fabric. He is brilliant in crisis, but corrosive in trust. And trust in this world is not ornamental. It is one of the beams holding the roof in place. Oaths, kinship, guest right, loyalty, shared honor. These are not soft ideals. They are the social architecture of the gods and humans alike. Loki keeps testing that architecture. At first, the testing can look almost playful. He exposes pride. He punctures certainty. He reminds the gods that their dignity is not quite as smooth as they pretend. There is a place in any court or council for the figure who can say what others avoid. Many cultures preserve such characters in story. The trickster, the fool, the boundary crosser, the one who moves between worlds because he does not fully belong to any single one. But a trickster is only tolerable while the community survives the joke. With Loki, the jokes begin to cut deeper. What makes him unsettling is not that he lies. Many gods deceive when it suits them. Odin himself is hardly a simple model of transparent honesty. The difference is that Loki's deception often seems to loosen the bonds between people. He does not merely defeat enemies. He exposes weaknesses among allies. He does not simply break rules. He makes everyone else wonder whether the rules were already hollow. That is why Loki becomes more than a troublesome personality. He becomes a wound inside Asgard. A wound is not foreign to the body. It is part of the body damaged against itself. Loki belongs close enough to hurt the gods in ways an outsider could not. His betrayal matters because there was relationship before betrayal. Without that earlier closeness, he would be just another enemy waiting beyond the wall. This is also why his bond with the gods feels so psychologically sharp. They know what he is, or at least they know enough. They have seen his appetite for mischief, his gift for evasion, his talent for turning any situation into a performance. Yet they keep him near because he is useful, because history has made him familiar, and perhaps because no one wants to admit how much danger has already been allowed into the hall. That is a very human pattern. Families, courts, kingdoms, institutions. They often tolerate the destructive insider because the destructive insider has also been helpful. He knows too much. He has solved too many problems. He has become part of the rhythm of things. Removing him would require admitting that the danger was not a sudden invasion, but a long accommodation. Loki survives in that uncomfortable space. He is neither fully trusted nor fully cast out. He is accused, forgiven, threatened, needed, and watched. Over time, that half-belonging becomes poisonous. Someone treated as both kin and contamination may eventually choose the role everyone has been preparing for him. This does not absolve him. It does not make his later actions innocent. but it does make the tragedy more complex than a simple tale of evil awakening. The gods help create the conditions in which Loki becomes their enemy. Not entirely. Loki has agency, and the myths do not let him escape responsibility. His cunning is his own. His cruelty, when it comes, is his own. But Asgard's way of handling him, using him, distrusting him, binding him through proximity without healing the fracture, turns tension into destiny. And destiny, in the world of Ragnarok, is rarely a single dramatic decision. More often, it is a pattern repeated until it hardens. By the time Baldr dies, Loki's place in the story will become almost unbearable. The laughter will no longer feel ambiguous. The trick will no longer leave room for recovery. What once looked like mischief will stand revealed as something colder, a willingness to wound the heart of Asgard itself. But that moment has not arrived yet. For now, Loki remains at the feast, in the journey, at the edge of the conversation, smiling at what others take seriously and taking seriously what others overlook. He is the loose thread in the divine tapestry. Pull gently, and he may repair what is torn. Pull too hard, and the pattern begins to come apart. That is the secret force of his character. Loki does not have to storm Asgard from outside. He only has to remain close long enough for mistrust to ripen. The final battle will have wolves, serpents, fire, and armies of the dead. But one of its first causes is quieter than any of these: the failure of a community to understand the danger of a broken bond. Ragnarok begins in prophecy, but it also begins at the table, among those who still call one another family. Chapter 6: The Children Who Should Not Have Been Born. There are births in myth that feel less like beginnings than warnings. Loki's children belong to that darker category. They enter the story not as infants to be welcomed, named, and folded into the safety of a household, but as signs. Their very existence seems to disturb the order of the world. Before they have chosen anything, before they have committed any crime against Asgard, prophecy has already placed them under suspicion. Fenrir, the wolf; Jormungandr, the serpent; Hel, the ruler-to-be of the dead. 3 children, each carrying a different kind of fear. It would be easy to introduce them as monsters and move on. Many retellings do exactly that. The wolf will devour Odin. The serpent will poison Thor. Hel will preside over the dead, and in the final collapse, her realm will no longer remain safely distant from the living world. Seen from the perspective of Asgard, the threat is obvious. The gods are not inventing fear from nothing. But the more interesting question is not whether they are dangerous. The more interesting question is what turns danger into destiny. When the gods learn what these children may become, they do not respond with curiosity or mercy. They respond like rulers who have received a classified report from the future. They separate, relocate, contain. Each child is handled as a problem to be managed before it matures into disaster. It is a policy of preemptive control, and for a while, it appears to work. That is what makes it so chilling. Fenrir is brought among the gods, at least for a time, but his growth unsettles them. He becomes too large, too strong, too visibly connected to the prophecy they dread. Jormungandr is cast into the sea, where he grows until he encircles Midgard itself. Hel is sent to rule over a cold realm of the dead, given authority, but also distance. A kingdom that is both a role and an exile. None of these choices are random. Each one reveals what Asgard fears most. Fenrir represents violence that cannot be domesticated, not merely a beast, but a living force that grows beyond the scale of the hall that tried to contain him. The gods may feed him, observe him, test him, but they cannot make him small again. His body becomes a prophecy no one can ignore. Jormungandr represents the threat that disappears from sight, but not from existence. Throw him into the ocean, and the world looks cleaner. The immediate problem is gone. Yet beneath the waves, the serpent becomes larger than any creature kept in the open could have been. He does not vanish. He becomes the boundary of the human world. Hell represents something quieter and in some ways more uncomfortable. She is not simply a battlefield enemy. She belongs to the dead who fall outside the glowing economy of heroic fame. Her realm reminds us that not every ending is celebrated, sung, or welcomed into Odin's hall. Asgard can honor warriors, but it cannot abolish death. Hell's existence gives death an administration, a face, a throne in the margins. Together, the three children form a map of everything divine order cannot fully master: violence, hidden enormity, and mortality. This is why the gods' reaction matters so much. They are not merely afraid of three strange beings. They are afraid of limits. Fenrir proves there is strength the gods cannot permanently command. Jormungandr proves that exile may only move danger into a deeper place. Hell proves that even the gods must organize themselves around death, not above it. And once again, prophecy turns every choice bitter. From Asgard's view, the gods are being practical. What should they do? Wait politely for the wolf to open his jaws at the end of the world? Invite the serpent to coil around the dinner table? Pretend the ruler of the dead is just going through a gloomy phase? Even the calmest reading has to admit that the gods face a real threat. But myth rarely lets a practicality remain innocent. The children are punished for what they are expected to become. Their future guilt reaches backward and stains their beginning. This is one of the most troubling moral currents in the Ragnarok story. The gods try to prevent disaster by treating prophecy as proof. In doing so, they create wounds that can never be appealed, forgiven, or undone. A child treated as a monster may become one. Not always, not automatically. The myth is not offering a simple lesson that fear alone creates evil. Fenrir, Jormungandr, and Hel are not ordinary misunderstood children waiting for a kind word and a warm meal. They are cosmic beings tied to forces much larger than personal psychology. But the pattern is still there. Asgard responds to feared destiny with coercion, and coercion gives that destiny emotional force. Revenge needs memory. By binding, casting out, and exiling Loki's children, the gods make sure memory will be abundant. This is especially important because Ragnarok is not only a military defeat, it is a return. The final day brings back everything Asgard tried to place at a safe distance. The wolf breaks free, the serpent rises, the dead march. Loki himself escapes his torment. The buried story becomes the visible one. What was managed as a security problem returns as judgment. That does not mean the gods had an easy alternative. This is where the myth resists comfortable moralizing. If they had done nothing, perhaps the prophecy would still have unfolded. If they had shown mercy, perhaps the wolf would still have opened his jaws. Fate in these stories is not a court case where every cause can be cleanly assigned. The evidence is older, stranger, and more symbolic than that. What we can say is this: the gods' fear gives shape to the doom they fear. They look at Loki's children and see the end of the world. So they act like beings already at war. They turn relationship into containment. They turn uncertainty into sentence. They turn possible futures into present punishments. And in a cosmos where bonds matter, those acts cannot remain weightless. The tragedy is not that Asgard fails to recognize danger. The tragedy is that Asgard recognizes danger only as something to be controlled, and control has a way of teaching its victims what they are worth. So the children who should not have been born are sent into the places prepared for them. The wolf toward his chain, the serpent toward the sea, the daughter toward the dead. From the outside, the world may seem safer. The halls can continue their feasts. The gods can tell themselves that order has been preserved. But beneath that order, a different story is growing, a jaw strengthening in restraint, a coil tightening under the waves, a throne waiting in the land where sunlight does not reach. Chapter 7: The Binding of Fenrir. Fenrir grows too quickly. That is the first problem. Not that he attacks the gods, not at first. Not that he has already torn open the sky or swallowed a king. The fear begins with growth itself. A wolf who can be managed today may not be manageable tomorrow. A creature who still accepts food from divine hands may one day look down at those hands and remember they were never offered in love. The gods see him changing. They see the strength in his body, the widening jaws, the scale of a prophecy becoming harder to dismiss as distant language. In a world already haunted by fate, Fenrir's growth is not a natural process. It is evidence. Every day he becomes larger, the future becomes more visible. And this is where fear begins to organize itself. The gods do not simply kill him. That detail matters. Perhaps the prophecy cannot be escaped so easily. Perhaps the old bonds and rules around sacred spaces, kinship, and reputation complicate what they are willing to do. Perhaps Fenrir is too dangerous even then. What the myths give us instead is a series of tests, almost ceremonial in their cruelty. The wolf is invited to prove his strength against chains. At first, the arrangement carries the atmosphere of a game. A powerful chain is brought. Fenrir is challenged. He breaks it. Another chain follows, stronger than the first. He breaks that too. Each broken binding confirms what the gods feared, but it also teaches Fenrir something. The gods are not playing. They are measuring him. They are learning what ordinary force cannot do. A strange intimacy forms around these tests. The gods need Fenrir's pride. They need him to accept the challenge willingly, because open struggle might be too dangerous. They rely on the very trait that makes him seem monstrous in their eyes, the confidence of a being who does not yet believe he can be truly trapped. And Fenrir, for his part, seems to understand more with each attempt. The laughter of the hall, if there was laughter, begins to thin. Then comes Gleipnir. Unlike the earlier chains, Gleipnir does not look impressive. In later tradition, it is made by dwarfs from impossible things, strange substances that belong more to riddle than metallurgy. It is smooth, light, almost delicate. That is precisely what makes it suspicious. A heavy chain announces itself as a contest of strength. A soft ribbon asks for trust. Fenrir senses the difference. He does not refuse outright. That would make him seem afraid, and pride still has him by the throat. But he demands a guarantee. If this binding is harmless, if the gods truly intend only another test of strength, then one of them must place a hand in his mouth as a pledge. For a moment, the story becomes very quiet. The demand cuts through the performance. It forces the gods to admit, without words, that the game is not a game. Someone must stand close enough to the lie to be wounded by it. Someone must pay the moral cost in flesh. Tyr steps forward. That is the detail that keeps this myth from becoming a simple tale of clever gods outwitting a monster. Tyr is associated with courage, oath, and solemn responsibility. His sacrifice gives the binding its tragic center. He places his hand in Fenrir's mouth, knowing what the others know, and perhaps knowing it more cleanly than any of them. When Fenrir struggles and cannot break free, the truth is revealed. The pledge has been violated. The wolf bites down. Tyr loses his hand. The gods preserve the world, and they do it through betrayal. There is no honest way to soften that completely. From the perspective of cosmic order, the binding may be necessary. Fenrir is not merely a large animal being mistreated by nervous rulers. He is tied to the death of Odin and the ruin of the gods. If he remains free, the danger is real. But from Fenrir's perspective, the lesson is equally clear. The gods used ceremony as a trap. They used honor as bait. They asked him to trust them and then proved trust foolish. That wound will not disappear. In stories about Ragnarok, revenge is not a sudden emotion that erupts from nowhere. It ripens. Fenrir's final violence is horrifying, but it is not without memory. When he breaks free at the end of time, he does not return as an abstract symbol of chaos. He returns as something betrayed, restrained, and fed for years on the knowledge that the gods' order was built partly on a broken pledge. This is why Tyr's hand matters so much. His loss is not just a heroic sacrifice. It is the visible mark of Asgard's compromise. The gods may continue to speak of law, order, and the defense of the worlds, but one of their own now carries the evidence that order was protected by deception. Tyr's missing hand becomes a kind of testimony. It says, yes, the wolf was dangerous. Yes, the world had to be defended. And yes, we lied. Myth often works best when it refuses to let us choose one clean interpretation. If we condemn the gods too easily, we ignore the scale of the threat. If we justify them too quickly, we ignore the moral darkness of their method. The binding of Fenrir lives in that uncomfortable middle ground. It asks whether a necessary betrayal is still a betrayal. It asks what happens when fear makes rulers break the very principles they claim to guard. The answer in this story is not immediate collapse. That would be simpler. The chain holds. Fenrir is bound. The halls of Asgard remain standing. Odin continues to prepare. Thor continues to defend the borders. Human beings in Midgard may never know how close the gods believe the danger came. On the surface, the decision works. But fate is not only concerned with surfaces. A chain can hold a body without healing a grievance. A prison can delay revenge without dissolving it. A ruler can win time and still lose authority in a deeper, slower way. Fenrir's binding buys the gods a future, but it also gives that future a sharper edge. And Tyr's sacrifice, noble as it is, cannot cleanse the act entirely. That is what makes the scene so powerful. One god behaves with terrible courage in the middle of collective deceit. His willingness to suffer does not erase the lie, but it prevents the lie from being completely hidden. He embodies the cost others would rather not face. In a sense, Tyr becomes the only honest part of a dishonest plan. Fenrir remains bound until the last days. But the myth never lets us forget that he was not merely overpowered. He was tricked. And when the final winter comes, when bonds of kinship fail across the human world and the old restraints begin to snap, the wolf's chain will not break as an isolated miracle of strength. It will break as the return of a debt. A promise was placed between his teeth, and the gods left blood there. Chapter 8. The Serpent Beneath the Sea. Jormungandr is not bound in a cave or chained beneath the earth. He is thrown into the ocean. At first, that sounds like distance. The sea is a convenient place for what the gods do not want to see. It is vast, cold, difficult to measure. It swallows evidence well, casts a danger beneath the waves, and the world above can continue as if the problem has been solved. But Jormungandr does not disappear. He grows. That single fact turns exile into something stranger. The gods remove him from the visible world, and beneath the surface he becomes larger than visibility itself. In time, the serpent encircles Midgard, the human realm, so completely that he holds his own tail in his mouth. He becomes not merely a creature in the ocean, but a boundary, a living horizon, a ring of threat around ordinary life. It is one of the great images of Norse myth because it does not behave like a simple monster story. A dragon in a cave guards treasure. A beast in a forest blocks a road. But Jormungandr surrounds the world. He is not located in one dangerous place. He turns the edge of the map into a body. Every shore, every storm, every dark movement beneath a fishing boat can be imagined as part of the same hidden presence. For human beings in Midgard, this matters. Their world is called an enclosure, but the enclosure is not absolute safety. It is a temporary clearing surrounded by forces too large to domesticate. The serpent beneath the sea is a reminder that human life happens inside limits. People plant fields, build homes, tell stories, raise children, and make laws, while something ancient and immense lies just beyond the line where land gives way to water. The gods may rule from Asgard, but Midgard lives with the serpent at its border. And then there is Thor. If Odin's relationship to Ragnarok is shaped by knowledge, Thor's is shaped by confrontation. He is the god who goes out to meet danger directly, hammer in hand, trusting strength, courage, and the clean honesty of combat. He does not interpret threat in the way Odin does. He answers it. Against giants, against monsters, against the raw pressure of chaos, Thor is the defender who steps forward. So it is fitting that his destined enemy is not subtle. Jormungandr is not a whisper in a prophecy or a secret at court. He is mass, venom, scale, oceanic force. His body is too large for the ordinary world to comfortably imagine. He belongs to that category of mythic beings whose size is itself a form of terror. To fight him is not merely to fight an animal. It is to fight the border between order and the abyss. Their rivalry, in later accounts, has the feeling of an old storm gathering again and again. Thor encounters the serpent before the final battle in stories that foreshadow their last meeting. One of the most famous involves a fishing expedition, where Thor draws Jormungandr up from the depths. The image is almost absurd at first glance, a god fishing for the world serpent. But the absurdity is part of the myth's power. The everyday act becomes cosmic. A line drops into the sea, and the end of the world pulls back. For a moment, the hidden enemy is visible. That is what the scene gives us. Not resolution, but revelation. Jormungandr rises from below, and Thor faces the shape of what has been waiting under Midgard all along. The serpent is not yet killed. The final battle is not yet allowed to happen. The world continues, but it continues with a memory of how close the end can come to the surface. This is how Ragnarok builds tension across time. It does not keep its enemies entirely off stage. It lets them appear in partial forms. A wolf tested with chains, a serpent glimpsed from the sea, a dead realm ruled in silence. Each encounter says, "Not yet." Each one also says, "Someday." Thor and Jormungandr are especially important because their final duel is one of the clearest examples of mutual destruction in the myth. At Ragnarok, Thor kills the serpent, but he does not survive the victory. He staggers only a short distance before dying from its venom. The defender wins the fight and still falls. That detail changes everything. In a simpler heroic story, the monster dies and the world is saved. The blow lands, the crowd rejoices, the boundary is restored. But Ragnarok is not interested in that kind of comfort. It allows Thor his strength. It allows him the dignity of facing the serpent and destroying it. Then it asks what strength can do against poison already in the blood. The answer is bleak, but not empty. Thor's death does not make his courage meaningless. It makes it costly. He meets the enemy he was always meant to meet. He protects the order he exists to defend, even as that order collapses around him. The tragedy is not that he fails to strike hard enough. The tragedy is that some battles are won too late to save the fighter. This is one of the reasons the serpent works so well as a symbol. Jormungandr is not only external danger, he is the consequence of danger pushed out of sight until it grows around the entire world. He is what happens when exile becomes environment. The gods throw him away, but there is no true away in a connected cosmos. The ocean is not a trash pit for prophecy. It is part of the structure. What is cast into it may return in tides, storms, venom, and memory. That idea feels ancient, but it has not aged. Every society has its seas, places where it sends what it cannot face. Problems are buried in institutions, pushed to borders, hidden in language, handed to future generations, or declared solved because they are no longer visible from the palace. But removal is not resolution. Some things grow precisely because they are unobserved. Jormungandr is the mythic form of that uncomfortable truth. And yet, the serpent is not merely a moral lesson. He remains a creature of awe. There is a grandeur to him that resists easy judgment. He does not flatter the human sense of importance. He encircles Midgard without needing to explain himself. He is part monster, part boundary, part prophecy made flesh. The sea hides him, but the world is shaped by his presence. So while Fenrir's story is about betrayal through trust, Jormungandr's is about distance that fails. The gods cast him down and outward. The result is not safety, but encirclement. A threat removed from the hall becomes a threat around the world. And beneath the waves, where no watchman from Asgard can stare long enough to feel secure, the serpent waits for the day when the sea itself will no longer hold him. When that day comes, Thor will meet him, not because victory is certain, because some enemies define the courage of those who stand against them. Chapter 9. Hel and the Kingdom of the Dead. Hel receives a kingdom, but it is hard to call it a gift. When the gods divide the children of Loki into the places they believe will contain them, Hel is sent away from the living brightness of Asgard and into the realm that bears her name. This is one of the quieter decisions in the road to Ragnarok. Fenrir's binding has drama, teeth, and blood. Jormungandr's exile has the immense visual power of the sea. Hel's exile is colder, less theatrical, almost administrative. And that may be exactly why it matters. Hel is not a warrior charging across a field. She is not a beast breaking chains. She is a ruler in the place most people would rather not imagine too closely. Her realm gathers the dead who do not belong to the heroic afterlife of Odin's chosen warriors. It is not simply a punishment chamber in the later, moralized sense that many people associate with the word hell. That similarity of sound has caused a great deal of confusion. The Norse hell is older, stranger, and less cleanly moral. It is a place of death, distance, and diminished warmth, but not merely a theater of wickedness. That distinction is important. If we turn hell into a simple devil figure, we flatten the myth. She is not presented only as evil waiting to be defeated. She is part of the cosmic order, however uncomfortable that order may be. The dead must go somewhere. Not every life ends in heroic combat. Not every person becomes a chosen warrior in Valhalla. Farmers die. Children die. The old die in bed. The sick vanish slowly from the rooms where they were once known. A society that glorifies courage still has to account for all the deaths that do not look like songs. Hell rules that remainder. There is a bleak honesty in this. The myth does not allow glory to absorb everyone. It leaves a vast population outside the bright hall of the battle dead. In doing so, it admits something that heroic cultures can sometimes avoid saying aloud. Most death is not spectacular. Most endings are private, ordinary, and resistant to ornament. Hell's kingdom gives those endings a place in the structure of the universe. But place is not the same as comfort. Hell's realm is often imagined with coldness, shadow, and separation. What matters most is not the architecture of the place, which varies across accounts and later imagination, but its emotional position. It lies away from the feast, away from the gods' immediate company, away from the warm circulation of honor. To be sent there is not necessarily to be condemned as wicked, but it is to be removed from the living world and from the heroic brightness Asgard prefers to celebrate. Hel then becomes the ruler of what glory leaves behind. This makes her role in Ragnarok especially powerful. At the end, the dead are not content to remain safely beneath the story. Forces from Hel's realm join the final movement against the gods. The boundary between the honored world and the hidden dead begins to fail. What was placed below, away, and out of sight rises into history. Again, the pattern repeats. Asgard tries to organize danger by assigning it a location. Fenrir to restraint, Jormungandr to the sea. Hell to the dead. But location does not remove meaning. Hel's distance from Asgard is itself part of the wound. She is given authority, yes, but authority in exile. She rules a kingdom no one in the Golden Halls wishes to visit until they have no choice. There is something almost political in that arrangement. Power often creates margins, then calls them natural. It decides who belongs near the center and who must govern, serve, or suffer at the edge. Hel is not powerless, but her power is marked by exclusion. She receives a realm because the gods do not want her among them. Her kingship is real, but it begins as banishment. That gives her a different kind of menace from her brothers. Fenrir frightens because he will break loose. Jormungandr frightens because he surrounds the world unseen. Hel frightens because she waits in a place everyone is already traveling toward. No chain needs to snap for death to matter. No sea needs to boil for her realm to grow. Every generation sends subjects to her kingdom. Quietly, continuously, without negotiation. This is why Hel cannot be dismissed as a side figure. She represents the part of existence that even gods must acknowledge but cannot glamorize completely. Odin can gather warriors into Valhalla, but he cannot turn all death into heroic preparation. Thor can defend Midgard from giants, but he cannot hammer mortality out of creation. Asgard may shine, but its light does not reach everywhere. And perhaps that is the real discomfort Hel brings. She reveals the limits of divine storytelling. The gods tell stories of victory, honor, battle, and defended borders. Hel keeps the ledger of what those stories omit. The unchosen dead, the quiet endings, the bodies not lifted into fame, the grief that does not become mythic glory. In the broader road to Ragnarok, this matters because the final battle is not only a clash between good and evil. It is the collapse of separations that once made the world understandable. Living and dead, bound and free. Sea and land, order and what order tried to exclude. Hel's realm is one of the great reservoirs of that excluded force. Still, we should be careful not to make her more active than the surviving sources always allow. Much about Hel is filtered through limited and later textual traditions, and her image has been reshaped by centuries of retelling. What we can say with more confidence is that she occupies a necessary and unsettling position in the mythic cosmos. She is both marginal and central, banished yet unavoidable. That contradiction is the core of her power. The gods may not love her kingdom, but the universe requires it. They may not want her presence near the feast, but every feast is shadowed by the fact that it will end. She does not need to shout across the worlds. She can remain where she is, receiving what comes to her, while the proud and the frightened continue pretending that distance is control. Hel waits, not with the impatience of a warrior denied battle, but with the stillness of a gate that knows all roads eventually find it. Her brothers are dramatic forces of rupture. She is something slower, the certainty beneath the noise. And when Ragnarok begins, the dead will no longer remain a quiet population beyond the edge of the song. They will have a ruler. They will have a road. And the gods will discover that what is excluded from glory may still return with history in its hands. Chapter 10. The Death of Baldr. Baldr's death begins before any weapon is raised. It begins with dreams. That is fitting, because the story of Baldr is not shaped like a normal murder tale. There is no enemy army at the gate, no battlefield, no giant roaring out of the mountains. The danger arrives inwardly, through sleep, through signs no one wants to interpret too quickly. Baldr, beloved among the gods, begins to dream of his own death. In a world already listening for prophecy, a dream is not easily dismissed. Baldr matters because he seems to represent what Asgard still wants to believe about itself. He is associated with beauty, brightness, innocence, and a kind of radiant goodness that even the more complicated gods cannot quite imitate. Odin may be wise, Thor strong, Loki clever, but Baldr is loved. That word carries a different force. His presence suggests that the divine world contains not only power and strategy, but tenderness. So when Baldr dreams of death, the fear is not only personal, it is symbolic. If Baldr can die, then the center is less safe than anyone hoped. If the beloved can be reached, then the walls of Asgard have never been the true boundary. The danger is already inside the family, inside the hall, inside the invisible spaces where trust should have been strongest. Frigg, his mother, responds not with war, but with protection. According to the familiar later account, she travels through the world and takes oaths from things that might harm him. Fire, water, metals, stones, trees, diseases, beasts. The world itself is asked to promise restraint. It is a maternal act, but also a cosmic one. Frigg tries to turn creation into a shield around her son. There is something deeply moving in that, and something fragile. A mother cannot abolish death, but she can negotiate with everything that might carry it. She can ask the world to be gentle. She can create, for a brief time, the illusion that love has found a legal loophole in fate, and for a while it seems to work. Baldr becomes invulnerable. The gods, relieved and perhaps a little intoxicated by relief, turn his safety into a game. They throw weapons at him, spears, stones, blades. Things that should kill become harmless. The scene can sound almost absurd, even cruel, when described plainly. The gods amuse themselves by attacking the one god who cannot be injured. But beneath the strangeness is a recognizable human impulse. When fear passes, people sometimes celebrate by touching the thing that frightened them. They laugh too loudly near the cliff edge. They retell the bad news as a joke once the danger seems gone. The gods throw weapons at Baldr because they believe death has been disarmed. Their laughter is not just joy. It is denial wearing festival clothes. Loki watches. That is where the temperature of the story changes. He notices the gap because Loki is always drawn to gaps. The overlooked exception, the poorly guarded door, the small detail everyone else has filed away as harmless. Frigg, in the traditional account, has not taken an oath from mistletoe. It seemed too young, too small, too insignificant to threaten anyone. Myths understand small things. They understand that disaster does not always arrive in the form we prepared for. A fortress may withstand armies and fall to a whisper. A kingdom may fear the monster at the border and miss the fracture at the table. Baldr is not killed by the grand weapons everyone can see. He is killed by the neglected thing, the one piece of the world not bound by the promise. Loki shapes that omission into murder. He does not simply hurl the mistletoe himself in the most familiar version. He guides the blind god Hodr, who has been standing apart from the game because he cannot aim. Loki gives him the fatal object, directs his hand, and turns innocence into the instrument of catastrophe. That detail is devastating. Hodr's blindness is not only physical, it becomes the blindness of a community that has let ritual replace vigilance. The gods are all present. The danger occurs in public. No enemy has breached the wall. No monster has broken a chain. Yet Baldr falls in the middle of Asgard, among those who love him. The silence after that fall may be the most terrible sound in the myth, because everyone understands at once that something more than a life has ended. The game is over. The illusion is over. The promise that Asgard could protect what was most precious has failed in full view of the gods themselves. Baldr's death is often described as a prelude to Ragnarok, but that word can make it feel secondary, like a plot point placed before the real disaster. It is more than that. Emotionally, it is the breaking point. The final battle may destroy the divine order physically, but Baldr's death wounds it spiritually. The gods can fight enemies. What they cannot easily survive is the knowledge that innocence has been murdered inside their own circle. And Loki's role makes the wound deeper. If a giant had killed Baldr, the response would be simple. Grief could harden into vengeance against the outside world. But Loki belongs to the inside. His act proves that the line between kin and enemy has collapsed. Asgard does not only face monsters, it has exiled. It faces betrayal from someone it had tolerated, used, and never truly healed. This is why Baldr's death feels quieter than Ragnarok, and in some ways, more intimate. The end of the world is enormous. It has horns, armies, fire, wolves, serpents, and the trembling of the cosmic tree. Baldr's death has a branch, a blind hand, a mother's incomplete protection, a trickster's patience. It shows that apocalypse does not always begin at maximum volume. Sometimes it begins when a room full of powerful people realizes, too late, that they mistook immunity for safety. There is also a hard lesson here about prophecy. Frigg's effort does not fail because she did nothing. It fails because she could not do everything. Odin's knowledge, Frigg's love, the gods' vigilance, the world's oaths, all of it still leaves one small opening. Fate does not need a large door when everyone believes the house is sealed. That is the cruelty of the story, but also its intelligence. Baldr's death is not random. It exposes the limits of every system Asgard trusts. Wisdom, protection, oath, family, strength, celebration. Each one matters. Each one fails. And after Baldr falls, nothing in the mythic world feels untouched. The wolf is still bound, but the gods are no longer whole. The serpent still lies beneath the sea, but poison has already entered the hall. Hel still waits in her kingdom, but now she has received the brightest of the gods. The road to Ragnarok has not merely advanced. It has become emotionally irreversible, because once Baldr is gone, the world may continue for a while, but it continues with the knowledge that its light can be killed. Chapter 11. The Failed Rescue from Hel. Grief sends the gods downward. After Baldr's death, Asgard does not immediately become a battlefield. There is no instant eruption of Ragnarok, no sudden breaking of every chain. Instead, the story pauses in mourning. That pause matters. It gives the gods one last chance to imagine that the damage can be repaired. Baldr has fallen, but perhaps he can return. This is one of the most human moments in the entire myth. When someone beloved is taken, the mind does not accept the fact all at once. It searches for terms, exceptions, hidden doors. There must be a condition, a bargain, a mistake in the law of death, something overlooked. For beings as powerful as the gods, that instinct becomes cosmic. If death is a realm, perhaps someone can ride there. If hell has received Baldr, perhaps hell can release him. So Hermod, often described as Odin's son, rides to the land of the dead. The journey itself is a quiet reversal of divine confidence. Asgard is used to sending force outward. Thor against giants, Odin toward knowledge, the gods against whatever threatens the world. But this is not conquest. This is petition. A messenger enters the realm of hell not to command, but to plead. That difference is crucial. Hell cannot simply be ignored now. The gods may have sent her away, may have accepted her as a distant ruler of those outside heroic glory, but Baldr's death forces them to recognize her authority. The brightest of the gods is no longer in the shining hall. He is in her keeping. For once, Asgard must negotiate with what it placed at the margin. In the familiar later account, hell sets a condition. Baldr may return if all things in the world weep for him. At first, the condition sounds almost merciful. It does not demand treasure, blood, or another life in exchange. It asks for universal grief. If Baldr is truly so beloved, then let creation prove it. Let every creature, every object, every corner of existence confess the loss. Let sorrow become unanimous. There is a strange beauty in that. The rescue of Baldr depends not on strength, not on cunning, not on a weapon made by dwarfs or a secret known by Odin, but on mourning. The whole world must become a witness. Stones, trees, animals, gods, humans. Everything must acknowledge that something precious has been taken, and nearly everything does. The myth imagines grief traveling through the world like weather. The gods send messengers. They ask, and the world answers. Things living and lifeless weep for Baldr. The cosmic order seems, for a moment, capable of one shared emotion. It is one of the rare moments in the story when unity feels possible, not through power, but through sorrow. Then comes the refusal. A giantess, often named Thok in later tradition, will not weep. In many retellings, this figure is linked to Loki in disguise, though as with much mythic material, we should hold the detail with some caution rather than treat every later shaping as a courtroom record. But the narrative meaning is clear enough. One dry eye is enough. One withheld grief is enough. Baldr remains with hell. That may seem unfair, almost absurdly so. All things must weep, and almost all things do. The world comes close to healing itself. Yet the condition is absolute. Near universal love cannot overcome a single refusal. This is not how modern audiences often want restoration to work. We prefer effort to count. We prefer overwhelming consensus to defeat one act of malice. But myth is not always interested in fairness. It is interested in the terrifying weight of completeness. A broken world cannot pretend to be whole because most of it is grieving. That is the hard idea beneath the scene. Baldr's death has exposed a fracture that cannot be covered by majority sorrow. If one being still refuses, if one voice remains outside the circle of mourning, then the unity required to reverse death does not exist. The condition does not fail on a technicality. It reveals the truth. The world is not one. And this is why the failed rescue is so devastating. It is not only that Baldr stays dead, it is that the gods learn there is no path back to innocence. The damage cannot be undone through love alone, even cosmic love. The refusal confirms that the wound inside creation remains open. If Thor is Loki, the meaning sharpens further. Loki's crime would not end with killing Baldr. He would also block the possibility of repair. That second act is colder than the first in a certain way. Murder happens in a moment. But refusing to mourn is a sustained rejection of the community's grief. It says, "Your loss does not bind me. Your beloved is not mine. Your sorrow has no claim. For Asgard, this is almost unbearable. The gods can punish an enemy. They can fight a monster. But how do they answer a refusal to share grief? There is no hammer for that. No spear can force genuine mourning. Tears, if compelled, would not meet the condition. The rescue of Baldr depends on something power cannot manufacture. That is one of the deepest lessons in this part of the myth. The gods are mighty, but they cannot command love. They cannot order the world to become emotionally whole. They cannot legislate sincerity. Even hell's condition, severe as it is, exposes a limit that no divine weapon can cross. The failed rescue also changes hell's role. She is not merely a passive keeper of the dead. She becomes the one who states the law by which death might be reversed, and the law proves impossible to satisfy. In this sense, hell does not need to be cruel. She only needs to be exact. Her realm operates on terms the living find agonizing, because the living always want exceptions for those they love. But death is not moved by favoritism. Baldr's continued absence becomes a quiet certainty beneath everything that follows. Asgard may still stand. The gods may still gather. The old routines may continue in diminished form. But the possibility of restoration has been tested and lost. That matters more than 100 omens. The road to Ragnarok is no longer only foretold. It has been emotionally sealed. There is no return to the world before the mistletoe. And perhaps that is why this story has survived with such force. It understands grief not as a single moment of sadness, but as a negotiation that fails. Anyone who has mourned knows the mind's first rebellion. This cannot be final. There must be someone to ask, somewhere to go, some condition to meet. The myth grants that hope a journey, a messenger, a ruler, a bargain, and then it lets one refusal close the gate. Baldr remains in hell. The gods return without him. And after that, the brightness of Asgard is no longer proof of safety. It is memory shining over loss. Chapter 12. Loki in chains. After Baldr, there is no easy way for Loki to remain among the gods. The old pattern has broken. Before, Loki could be tolerated because his damage still seemed survivable. He could insult, deceive, complicate, and then somehow become useful again. The gods had lived for a long time with that arrangement, as dangerous families and courts often do. They knew he was trouble. They also knew he was clever. And cleverness has a way of buying forgiveness long after trust has expired. But Baldr's death changes the calculation. This is not a stolen treasure, not an embarrassing trick, not a mess that can be repaired by forcing Loki to solve the very problem he created. The beloved god is dead. The rescue from hell has failed. The wound inside Asgard is no longer hidden beneath laughter, feasting, or old habit. It has become public, irreversible, and sacred. So the gods turn on Loki. The punishment that follows is one of the most severe images in the Norse mythic world. Loki is captured, bound beneath the earth, and fixed in place with terrible finality. A serpent is set above him, dripping venom onto his face. His wife, Sigyn, remains beside him with a bowl, catching the poison where she can. But when the bowl fills and she turns away to empty it, the venom falls. Loki writhes in agony, and the earth shakes. Even if we strip away later embellishment and handle the surviving tradition carefully, the core image remains unmistakable. The trickster is no longer merely excluded. He is immobilized, tormented, and buried beneath the world he helped destabilize. At first glance, this might look like justice. Loki has crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed. He has helped kill Baldr, and in many tellings he has prevented Baldr's return. He has struck not only at a person, but at the emotional heart of Asgard. A community that does nothing after such an act is no longer a community. The gods must answer him somehow, or admit that their laws, loyalties, and grief have no force. But the punishment does not feel like closure. It feels like pressure. That difference matters. Closure suggests a wound cleaned and bound, pain acknowledged, order restored. Loki's binding does not restore anything. Baldr remains dead. Frigg remains bereaved. Odin still knows the future will darken. The wolf still waits in restraint. The serpent still coils in the sea. And hell still keeps what Asgard could not retrieve. Loki's chains do not heal the world. They only fasten one part of its pain beneath the surface. This is a recurring mistake in the story of Ragnarok. The gods confuse containment with resolution. They bound Fenrir and bought time. They cast Jormungandr into the ocean and gained distance. They sent hell to the dead and gained a margin. Now they chain Loki beneath the earth and gain silence, or something close to it. But silence is not peace. A buried scream is still part of the world. In fact, Loki's punishment becomes a dark reflection of Fenrir's. The wolf was bound because of what he was prophesied to do. Loki is bound because of what he has done. Yet both bindings create the same kind of future. They turn a dangerous being into a waiting catastrophe. The chains are strong, but they also concentrate hatred. The gods are no longer dealing with a restless trickster at the table. They are creating an enemy whose suffering is measured in ages. And Sigyn complicates the image. Her presence keeps the scene from becoming only a portrait of deserved torment. She stays. She catches the venom. She cannot save Loki from punishment, and she does not undo his guilt. But her loyalty introduces a quieter sorrow. Even the condemned are not always unloved. Even those who have done unforgivable harm may still be the center of someone's devotion. That is uncomfortable, and myth often is. Sigyn does not make Loki innocent. She makes the punishment human enough to hurt. Her bowl becomes one of the smallest and saddest objects in the road to Ragnarok. Not a weapon, not a throne, not a horn announcing the end, but a vessel held by tired hands against falling poison. It cannot stop the doom. It can only delay pain again and again until it fails again and again. There is a grim rhythm in that. Hold the bowl, catch the venom, empty the bowl. hear him cry out, "Return, repeat." It is almost domestic in its horror, a household task transformed into cosmic endurance. And in that repetition, we can feel the long waiting period before Ragnarok. The end is not arriving yet. It is being stored, accumulated, pressurized in the dark. The gods may believe they have removed Loki from the story, but they have actually changed his role. Before, he was the unstable insider, dangerous because he could move freely through the social world of Asgard. In chains, he becomes something else, a future rupture, a force of revenge held in reserve. When the final collapse begins, Loki will not return as a mischievous companion. He will return as an enemy aligned with the forces marching against the gods. That transformation is essential. Ragnarok is not simply the moment when monsters attack. It is the moment when everything unresolved becomes active. Every chain, exile, insult, and failed bargain finds motion. Loki's binding belongs to that pattern. The gods punish him because they must, but the form of punishment ensures that his hatred will not fade into irrelevance. It will mature underground. Again, the myth denies us a clean moral answer. Should Loki go unpunished? No. That would make nonsense of Baldr's death and the grief of Asgard. But does punishment repair what he has broken? Also no. The story is more honest than that. Justice can be necessary and still incomplete. Retaliation can be understandable and still feed the future it hopes to prevent. That is part of Ragnarok's cold intelligence. It shows a world where nearly every major action can be defended from one angle and condemned from another. The gods protect order, but through deception and violence. Loki exposes hypocrisy, but with cruelty. Fenrir is dangerous, but betrayed. Hel is exiled, but necessary. Odin seeks wisdom, but becomes haunted by control. No one stands entirely outside consequence. Loki's chains are consequence made visible. Yet beneath the earth, consequence does not sleep. The venom falls. Sigyn lifts the bowl. Loki twists against the bonds, and the ground trembles. Above him, the gods continue in a diminished world, perhaps relieved that the betrayer has been removed, perhaps aware that relief is not the same as safety. Because a chained Loki is not an ending. He is a promise deferred, and when the last winter deepens, when the old bonds fail and the buried things begin to rise, the wound Asgard tried to fasten shut will open with the force of everything it refused to heal. Chapter 13, The World Begins to Break. Ragnarok does not begin on the battlefield. That is one of the most important things to understand. The final battle at Vigrid is spectacular, but spectacle can mislead us. It can make us think the end of the world is mainly a matter of weapons, monsters, and gods meeting in one last terrible hour. Yet the myth begins the collapse earlier, in a place less dramatic and more frightening. It begins in the weather. Fimbulwinter returns us to the image with which the story opened. Not one winter, but 3, with no summer between them. The seasons fail. The rhythm that allows life to trust the world is interrupted. Fields do not recover. Herds thin. Food disappears. The cold is not just physical, it becomes moral. People who might have remained decent in ordinary hardship begin to fracture under pressure. This is where Ragnarok becomes more than a cosmic disaster. It becomes a social one. The old accounts describe a world where kinship breaks down, where brothers kill brothers, where sacred bonds lose their force. The language is severe because the violation is severe. In a traditional society, family loyalty is not sentimental decoration. It is survival. It is law before law. It is the structure by which food, protection, inheritance, honor, and memory pass from one generation to the next. When kinship fails, the world has already begun to end. That detail deserves more attention than it often receives. Many retellings rush from Fimbulwinter straight to the monsters, as if the cold were only a weather effect before the main scene. But the winter is not background. It is the first battlefield. It strips away the ordinary supports that make people recognizably human to one another. Hunger does that. Cold does that. Fear does that. A society may speak proudly of its values when the barns are full and the roads are open. It is much harder when every meal feels like theft from tomorrow, when every neighbor becomes a possible rival, when every obligation begins to look unaffordable. Fimbulwinter tests the moral architecture of the world, and the architecture does not hold. This is not because human beings are uniquely wicked in the story. It is because the cosmos itself has entered a state of scarcity. The failure of the seasons becomes the failure of trust. The frozen earth and the broken household mirror one another. What happens in the sky happens at the table. What happens to the harvest happens to the oath. That is one of the deepest patterns in old mythic thinking. Nature and society are not separate systems. A disorder in one reveals or intensifies disorder in the other. When the seasons lose their pattern, human conduct follows. The world outside and the world inside begin to resemble each other. The result is not merely violence. It is betrayal. Violence can be terrible and still familiar. Raids, feuds, and battles belong to many heroic stories. But betrayal is different, because it destroys the meanings that once made conflict bearable. If an enemy attacks, the community can gather itself against him. If a brother attacks a brother, the wound opens inside the basic unit of trust. Ragnarok begins there. Not with Fenrir's jaws, not with Jormungandr rising, not with Loki breaking loose. It begins when the bonds that should restrain destruction no longer restrain anything. This gives the myth an unsettling realism. Worlds rarely collapse only because of external enemies. They become vulnerable when internal trust has already decayed. A city can have walls and still fall if those inside no longer believe in one another. A kingdom can have armies and still rot if its oaths mean nothing. Asgard itself has shown us this pattern in divine form. A family that cannot heal its wound. A ruler who cannot escape fate. A trickster who turns intimacy into harm. Now the same pattern spreads through Midgard. Human society becomes a smaller echo of the divine crisis. The gods betrayed Fenrir through a false pledge. Loki betrayed Baldr through a hidden weapon. Grief failed to unite the world because one refusal remained outside the circle. Now among humans, the sacred bonds of kinship and loyalty break under the cold. The world is not just being attacked by monsters. It is becoming the kind of world in which monsters can return. That is the true terror of Fimbulwinter. It prepares the ground. A battlefield does not appear out of nowhere. Before the armies march, something has to happen to meaning. People must stop believing certain lines cannot be crossed. The unthinkable must become thinkable. then practical, then ordinary. Fimbulwinter is the season in which that transformation occurs. The cold teaches desperation. Desperation teaches cruelty. Cruelty teaches people to survive by becoming less bound to one another. And once that lesson spreads, the end has already entered the human heart. The myth does not need to describe every village, every famine, every broken household. It gives us the pattern and lets the imagination do the rest. A door barred against relatives, a store of grain hidden from a neighbor, a son measuring the weakness of his father, a brother's hand lingering too long near a weapon. Not because people have suddenly become demons, but because the world that once supported restraint has withdrawn. This is darker than a simple invasion. If Ragnarok were only gods versus monsters, then goodness could remain safely on one side and evil on the other. But the moral collapse of Fimbulwinter refuses that comfort. It suggests that the end arrives partly through ordinary beings failing under extraordinary pressure. The monsters matter, but they do not act in a vacuum. They rise when the world is already weakened by hunger, fear, and broken trust. That makes the coming freedom of Fenrir and Loki feel less like an interruption and more like a culmination. Chains break when the age of bonds is over. The word bond matters here. It can mean a chain, but it can also mean an oath, a relationship, a duty, a form of trust. Ragnarok is the age when bonds fail in every sense. Family bonds fail among humans. The bonds holding Loki and Fenrir will fail among the gods' enemies. The boundaries between sea and land, living and dead, order and chaos will fail across the cosmos. Fimbulwinter is the first announcement that the universe is losing its ability to hold things in place. And still, somewhere in Asgard, the gods know what this means. They have heard of this winter. They know it is not a passing hardship. It is the sign that prophecy has moved from future into present. The long waiting period is ending. All those choices made in fear, all those punishments and exiles, all those forces pushed below or beyond the edge of sight, they are about to return. The snow does not merely cover the world, it reveals it. Under the whiteness, the old loyalties are found wanting. Under the hunger, the old promises crack. Under the silence between one winter and the next, a terrible truth becomes clear. Ragnarok has already begun before the horn is sounded. The battlefield will come later. The end starts at home. Chapter 14. The monsters are freed. There comes a moment when what was delayed becomes present. For a long time, the gods have lived inside that delay. Fenrir was bound. Jormungandr was beneath the sea. Loki was chained below the earth. Hel's realm remained apart from the warmth of the living world. Each danger had been given a place, a restraint, a distance, a name. The old order survived by keeping certain forces where they could be watched, ignored, or feared from afar. But Ragnarok is the hour when distance fails. The first horror is not only that the monsters are coming, it is that they are returning from the exact places the gods assigned them. The final collapse is not an invasion by strangers. It is the release of everything Asgard tried to manage without healing, defeat without resolving, bury without forgetting. Fenrir breaks free. The wolf who once accepted the gods' tests, who felt Tyr's hand placed between his jaws as a pledge, now tears through the restraint that defined his existence. The chain that seemed impossible to break no longer holds. In that image, the myth gathers all the old fear of broken bonds into one body. Fenrir is not simply loose. The promise of control has failed. And when Fenrir is free, the world becomes more honest. That sounds strange, but it is true in the harsh logic of the myth. The gods always feared what he would become. They acted on that fear. They made him their prisoner. Now the future they dreaded has arrived in visible form. No more ceremonies. No more tests disguised as games. No more soft ribbon hiding divine deceit. The wolf is what they believed he was, and what their betrayal helped make unforgettable. Then the sea begins to change. Jormungandr rises from the depths, and with him the boundary of Midgard itself seems to convulse. The serpent who encircled the human world no longer remains hidden beneath the waves. In some accounts, the waters surge, the serpent thrashes, and poison enters the air. The creature cast into the ocean now turns the ocean into a weapon of revelation. This is not just a monster emerging. It is the hidden becoming undeniable. For ages, the human world has existed with the serpent around it. People could live without seeing him, and perhaps that was a mercy. Civilization often depends on not thinking too long about the forces that make it fragile. But at Ragnarok, the submerged truth breaks the surface. The edge of the world moves. The sea is no longer a border. It is an opening. And Loki escapes. That sentence carries a different kind of dread. Fenrir's freedom is physical terror. Jormungandr's rising is cosmic terror. Loki's release is personal, moral, almost intimate. The one who knew the gods from within, who understood their pride, grief, habits, and hidden fractures, is no longer pinned beneath punishment. The venom, the bowl, the long agony, the trembling earth, all of it has been storing him for this moment. When Loki returns, he does not return as the old companion of Thor's journeys or the uneasy presence at divine feasts. He returns as an enemy. That transformation is one of the bleakest movements in the story. The gods once used Loki's cunning to solve their problems. Now that same cunning belongs to the catastrophe. The intelligence that once moved through Asgard like a dangerous tool has become openly hostile. What was ambiguous has chosen its side. And from Hell's realm, the dead begin to move. This is where Ragnarok becomes larger than revenge. It is not only the living enemies of the gods who gather. The boundaries of death itself become unstable. Hell's forces join the final march, and the realm that Asgard preferred to keep at the edge of its imagination now sends its population into the center of the story. The dead have waited longer than any army. Their movement changes the emotional scale of the apocalypse. A battlefield of gods and monsters is one thing. A battlefield that includes the dead is something deeper. It means history itself has become restless. All that was buried, mourned, neglected, or sent away now travels toward the last confrontation. Then comes Naglfar, the ship associated in later accounts with the dead and the end-time voyage. It is one of the more disturbing images connected to Ragnarok, not because it is loud, but because it feels assembled from the residue of mortality. The ship sails when the old restraints collapse, carrying forces that should never have crossed back into the world of the living. Whether every detail of its description belongs to early belief or later shaping, its narrative function is unmistakable. It is the vessel of return, a dark crossing from the margins into the final center. Ships in myth often mean passage. Here the passage is dreadful. The dead do not remain dead in the way the gods hoped. The exiled do not remain distant. The chained do not remain chained. The ocean does not remain surface. The underworld does not remain below. Ragnarok is not chaos in the childish sense of things becoming random. It is more precise than that. It is the collapse of categories that made order possible. Bound and free, living and dead, inside and outside, past and future, all begin to mix. This is why the release of the monsters feels inevitable rather than surprising. The myth has been preparing us for it from the beginning. Every act of containment carried a hidden question. How long? How long can the wolf be held? How long can the serpent remain below? How long can Loki's pain be trapped underground? How long can Hell's kingdom stay out of the light? At Ragnarok, the answer is finally given. Not forever. The gods were never promised forever. That is the great difference between Norse divine order and many more comfortable visions of heaven. Asgard is not eternal stillness. It is an achievement inside time. And anything inside time must face return, decay, reversal, and debt. The monsters are freed because the age of postponement has ended. This does not make the gods foolish for trying. That would be too easy. Delay mattered. The world existed because they held things back. Human beings had seasons, laws, stories, and generations because the gods resisted the forces that would one day overwhelm them. There is nobility in holding a doomed line. There is meaning in buying time. But delay is not cancellation. The final release reveals the difference. Fenrir's chain was never the same as peace. Jormungandr's exile was never the same as safety. Loki's punishment was never the same as healing. Hell's distance was never the same as absence. The gods preserved the world by arranging its dangers around the edges. Ragnarok begins when the edges come walking back. And now the movement is no longer private. The winter has broken human society. The old loyalties have cracked. The divine punishments have failed. The hidden enemies have emerged. Across the realms, the last pieces begin to align. It is as if the cosmos, after ages of holding its breath, exhales everything it has refused to release. The wolf runs. The serpent rises. The ship sails. Loki leads. The dead march. And somewhere above all of this, the watchman of the gods must hear the world changing shape beneath him. The signs are no longer signs. The prophecy has become weather, movement, armies, venom, and flame. There is nothing left to interpret, only to answer. Chapter 15, The Last March of the Gods. At last, the gods stop preparing. That is the terrible dignity of this moment. For so long, Asgard has lived in anticipation, gathering knowledge, choosing warriors, watching borders, binding enemies, interpreting omens. The gods have tried to manage the future from every possible angle, but there comes a point when strategy ends. The thing feared for ages no longer belongs to prophecy. It belongs to the ground beneath their feet. Heimdall sounds Gjallarhorn. The horn is not merely an alarm, it is the sound of recognition. It tells the worlds that the old waiting is over. No god can pretend the signs are ambiguous now. No council can postpone a decision. No watcher can keep watching as if vigilance alone were enough. The call carries through the realms like the final statement of a truth everyone already knew and still dreaded hearing. Ragnarok has arrived. The gods move toward Vigrid, the great plain of battle. It is difficult to imagine any march more burdened by knowledge. These are not warriors rushing toward an uncertain contest, drunk on the possibility of triumph. The gods know too much for that. Odin knows the wolf waits for him. Thor knows the serpent has risen. Heimdall knows Loki is free. The chosen dead of Valhalla know that all their feasting and fighting have been training for this hour, and still they go. That is the point the myth refuses to make easy. If courage were only a matter of expecting victory, it would be a kind of optimism. Ragnarok gives us something harsher and more serious: courage without illusion. The gods do not march because they have discovered a secret way out. They march because the alternative would be to let the world end unanswered. Odin rides at the center of that tragedy. The All-Father, who has sacrificed for wisdom, who has listened to prophecy and hunted for hidden knowledge, now meets the limit of all his searching. Every warning has led here. Every preparation has led here. His ravens, his throne, his sacrificed eye, his gathered warriors, none of it allows him to step aside from the wolf. There is something almost ceremonial in the way he goes to Fenrir. Not because the meeting is clean or noble in a comfortable sense. It is horrifying. The wolf is no longer a captive body held by a ribbon-like chain. He is the released consequence of divine fear and betrayal, grown to the scale of doom. Odin does not face a random beast. He faces a fate he has known by name. Nearby, Thor turns toward Jormungandr. Their confrontation has been waiting beneath the sea for ages. Thor's life has been defined by the defense of boundaries, and the serpent is the boundary made monstrous, the encircling threat pulled up into open air. This is not the clever, shadowed conflict of Loki and Heimdall, nor the solemn collision of Odin and Fenrir. It is elemental, hammer against venom, defender against the thing that surrounds what he defends. Thor's strength matters here, even though it will not save him. That is worth saying plainly, because tragedy is often mistaken for futility. The fact that Thor will die does not make his resistance meaningless. In the moral universe of Ragnarok, action is not valuable only when it prevents loss. Sometimes action matters because it gives loss a form that can be faced. Thor meets the serpent because that is what defense looks like when safety is no longer possible. Then there are the warriors of Valhalla. The Einherjar have long been imagined in the bright violence of Odin's hall, fighting by day, feasting by night, restored again for the next contest. From one angle, it is a warrior's dream. From another, it is one of the most unsettling institutions in myth. An afterlife organized around a future catastrophe. Their paradise has always had a purpose. Their joy has always carried a draft notice hidden inside it. Now the doors open. They march not as an army that can guarantee victory, but as a final offering of human courage to a cosmic defeat. That gives them a strange beauty. These are the dead, already taken from the ordinary world, now asked to spend even death in service of a doomed defense. The myth does not mock them for it. It honors them. But the honor is severe. They were chosen not to escape the end, but to stand inside it. This is one of the places where Ragnarok differs sharply from more triumphant end-time stories. There is no simple promise that the righteous army will win if its faith is strong enough. There is no last-minute reversal that turns all sacrifice into celebration. The gods and their warriors are not spared the consequences of the world they inhabit. Their greatness lies in the fact that they meet those consequences awake. The battlefield gathers every unresolved force. Fenrir comes with the memory of the broken pledge. Jormungandr comes from the sea where exile became encirclement. Loki comes from torment, no longer the ambiguous companion, but the declared enemy. The dead come from Hell's realm, no longer safely below the story. Fire approaches with the power to erase the shape of the old world. Against them stand the gods, but not as untouched symbols of purity. They stand as rulers who have made hard choices, some necessary, some cruel, some both. They stand with honor and guilt intertwined. Their enemies are monstrous, but not meaningless. Their own order is precious, but not innocent. That is why the final march carries such weight. It is not good marching against evil in a clean line. It is a damaged order marching against the consequences it could delay but never master. And yet, the myth still allows grandeur. The gods do not collapse into apology. They do not sit in the halls of Asgard reviewing every mistake while the world burns outside. They go out. Odin rides. Thor advances. Heimdall stands ready. The dead take their places. Even in a compromised world, duty remains possible. That may be one of Ragnarok's sternest consolations. It does not say that perfect innocence is required before one can defend what matters. If that were true, no one would ever defend anything. The gods are flawed, but the world they protect still has value. Midgard's fields, human homes, the bonds that have not yet broken, the memory of beauty, the possibility of renewal. These are not made worthless by the failures of Asgard. So the last march is not empty theater. It is the final act of responsibility by beings who know responsibility may not be enough. Imagine the sound of it. The horn fading into the movement of armies, the cold air still heavy with the memory of Fimbulwinter, the plain opening before them, the old enemies visible at last. No more prophecies hidden in dreams. No more signs beneath the surface. No more waiting for the future to reveal its face. The future is there. Jaws, coils, fire, iron, venom, and the dead. The gods arrive not because they can save the old order intact, but because the old order deserves witnesses at its ending. It deserves defenders. It deserves a final answer spoken not in prophecy, but in action. And so they enter Vigrid, not hopeful in any easy sense, not ignorant, not clean, but ready. Chapter 16. The Death of the Divine Order. The battle at Vigrid is not a contest to decide whether the old world will survive. By the time the gods arrive, that question has already been answered. The winter has done its work. The bonds have failed. The monsters have returned. The dead are marching. What remains is not prevention, but encounter. The great figures of the myth must now meet the shapes that have been waiting for them across the whole story. Odin goes to Fenrir. There is no cleverness left for him to use. No hidden knowledge can soften the wolf's jaws. No prophecy can be bargained with now that it has become flesh. Odin, who spent so much of his existence seeking wisdom, faces the one truth wisdom could not undo. Fenrir devours him. It is one of the most devastating images in Norse myth, not because Odin is merely killed, but because of what dies with him. He is the mind of Asgard, the restless seeker, the ruler who tried to understand fate before fate arrived. His death means that the old order loses not only its king, but its interpreter. The one who listened most closely to the future is swallowed by it. And yet, the story does not leave the moment unanswered. Vidar, Odin's son, steps forward and avenges him. In the traditional account, Vidar kills Fenrir, often imagined with a terrible, silent force. This vengeance matters, but it does not reverse the loss. It cannot bring Odin back. It cannot restore Asgard. It cannot unmake the betrayal that helped shape Fenrir's hatred. That is the bitter rhythm of Ragnarok. Justice comes too late to be restoration. Vidar's act is still meaningful. The wolf does not simply consume the king and pass unchallenged into the ruins. A son answers the father's death. Memory becomes action. But the action belongs to a world already burning. It is vengeance as witness, not salvation. Elsewhere on the plain, Thor meets Jormungandr. This duel feels almost older than the gods themselves. Strength against venom, thunder against the encircling sea. Thor kills the serpent. The defender lands the blow that he was always meant to land. For a breath, it seems like victory has taken form in the middle of the ruin. Then the venom does its work. Thor staggers away and falls. The detail is painfully precise. He does not die before killing the serpent. He does not fail in the ordinary sense. He does exactly what the defender of Midgard exists to do. He destroys the creature that surrounded the human world. But the poison has already entered him, and victory cannot cleanse it. This is one of the clearest moral images in the whole myth. Some dangers can be defeated and still leave death behind. Some battles can be won in action and lost in consequence. Thor's fall tells us that courage may complete its duty without preserving the one who performs it. The myth honors him by allowing his strength to matter. It wounds us by refusing to let strength be enough. Then Loki and Heimdall destroy one another. Their meeting has a different texture. Odin and Fenrir are fate and kingship. Thor and Jormungandr are force and boundary. Loki and Heimdall are intimacy and vigilance, betrayal and watchfulness. Heimdall is the guardian who sees danger coming. Loki is the danger that once came from inside. At Ragnarok, they face each other as opposites that have understood one another for too long. They kill each other. There is a grim balance in that. Loki, the old wound inside Asgard, does not survive the order he helped bring down. Heimdall, the watchman of that order, cannot preserve himself outside its death. Each completes the other's ending. The trickster and the guardian vanish together, as if the myth is saying that once the house burns, both the intruder and the sentry are consumed by the same fire. Around them, the world unravels. The battlefield is not only filled with individual duels, it is filled with the collapse of a structure. Gods fall, enemies fall, old categories lose meaning. The living and the dead, the bound and the free, the exiled and the enthroned, all meet in a violence that is less like war than judgment. Every separation that once held the cosmos in place breaks open. Then comes the fire. In the Ragnarok tradition, fire consumes the world. Often this is linked with the figure of Surtur, the fire giant, whose flames sweep across creation. The image is vast, but it should not be treated as mere spectacle. Fire here is not just a special effect at the end of a battle. It is the final erasure of the old arrangement. The halls, the fields, the roads between worlds, the familiar shape of divine power all pass into flame. This is why Ragnarok feels so final, even though renewal will come afterward. The old world is not repaired, it is burned. That distinction matters. Repair would mean the structure remains, patched where it failed. Burning means the structure has reached the limit of what it can carry. The gods do not win back Asgard. They do not negotiate a truce with Fenrir, or exile the Serpent again, or bind Loki beneath the earth a second time. The old solutions have expired. Ragnarok is the death of the divine order, because every method by which that order survived has failed at once. Knowledge fails to save Odin. Strength fails to save Thor. Watchfulness fails to save Heimdall. Chains fail to hold Fenrir. Distance fails to hide Jormungandr. Punishment fails to silence Loki. Even glory fails to protect the gods from time. And yet, the myth does not present this failure as meaningless. That is the strange grandeur of it. The gods fall, but they fall in the direction of what they have always been. Odin meets the knowledge he pursued. Thor meets the enemy he was born to face. Heimdall answers the breach he was meant to guard. The warriors of Valhalla enter the battle for which they were chosen. No one escapes the pattern. But neither does everyone flee from it. This is where the story becomes more than despair. A shallow apocalypse destroys the world because destruction is exciting. Ragnarok destroys the world because endings reveal the truth of what has been built. The final battle exposes the old order completely. Its courage, its guilt, its beauty, its fear, its pride, its loyalty, its broken promises. Nothing remains hidden in the fire. Fenrir's jaws reveal the limit of kingship. The serpent's venom reveals the cost of defense. Loki's last combat reveals the fatal danger of an unhealed wound. Surtur's flame reveals that even divine architecture belongs to time. Ragnarok is not chaos without meaning. It is meaning made unbearable. The gods had always known this day would come. That does not make their deaths smaller. It makes them larger. They do not die as immortals surprised by mortality, but as beings who have lived for ages under the shadow of their own ending. Their final tragedy is not ignorance, it is recognition. The world tree trembles, the sky darkens, the old halls burn, and in the roar of flame, the divine order that once seemed to stand above all things becomes what everything inside time eventually becomes: memory, ash, and story. Chapter 17, After the Fire. After Ragnarok, the first miracle is not triumph. It is continuation. The old world has burned. The gods have fallen. Odin is gone. Thor is gone. Loki and Heimdall have destroyed one another. The great enemies have spent themselves in violence, and the order that once held the cosmos together has collapsed into fire, smoke, and sea. For a moment, the myth seems to leave us with nothing. That emptiness is important. Renewal does not arrive as a cheerful correction. as if the destruction were only a dramatic inconvenience before the universe resets itself. The world that returns after Ragnarok is not the same world with the ashes swept away. It is a world after loss, a world that must carry the memory of what ended. Then the earth rises again from the sea. The image is quiet compared with the battle that came before it. No horn, no jaws, no venom, no armies of the dead, just land appearing from water, green and new, as if creation itself has taken a breath after nearly drowning. The violence of the old age gives way to something almost shy, a world beginning again without boasting that it has solved every mystery. This is one of the reasons Ragnarok is not pure annihilation. It is catastrophe followed by fragile return. Some gods survive. The sons of Odin and Thor remain in the renewed world. Vidar, who avenged Odin, is part of what comes after. Vali is often counted among the survivors. Thor's sons, Modi and Magni, inherit Mjolnir, the hammer that once defended the old world. The object remains, but its owner does not. That detail says a great deal. Power continues, but it has changed hands. The symbol survives as inheritance, not as repetition. The old generation cannot simply resume its place. That may be the most honest thing about the renewal. The world does not heal by pretending the fathers never died. The new order must be built by those who remain, and what they inherit is not innocence. It is memory, responsibility, and tools whose meanings have been altered by grief. Then Baldr returns. This is perhaps the most emotionally powerful reversal in the myth. The god whose death marked the breaking of Asgard comes back into the renewed world. His return does not undo the suffering that followed his fall. It does not make Frigg's grief unreal, or Loki's crime harmless, or Ragnarok unnecessary. But it changes the final shape of the story. The light that was lost is not lost forever. Still, we should not make this too easy. Baldr's return is not the same as restoring the old Asgard. He does not come back to a world untouched by death. He comes back after death has done its work. That gives the renewal a chastened quality. It is not the bright confidence of the First Order, with its walls, feasts, bargains, and hidden fears. It is something quieter, perhaps wiser, because it has seen what power could not prevent. A myth that ends only in destruction teaches one kind of truth. A myth that ends in renewal after destruction teaches another. Ragnarok says that endings are real. It does not soften that. Gods die. Worlds burn. Loved ones are taken and not immediately returned. But it also says that endings may not have the final word over meaning. Something can survive the fire without canceling the tragedy of the fire. That balance is difficult, and the myth holds it with unusual restraint. Then come Leif and Lifthrasir, the human survivors. Their names are often understood in relation to life itself, and their role is deceptively simple. They survive the catastrophe and become the beginning of humanity in the renewed world. They do not defeat Fenrir. They do not slay the Serpent. They do not sit in Odin's council. They endure. That matters. In a story full of gods and monsters, the future of humanity rests not with the loudest figures, but with those who live through the impossible. They are not glorious in the old heroic sense. Their greatness is quieter. They preserve the human thread. After all the divine strategies and cosmic battles, the continuation of ordinary life becomes one of the myth's deepest hopes. There is something humbling in that. The gods fall in grandeur, but human survival depends on shelter, patience, and the ability to begin again. The renewed earth needs not only avengers and inheritors, but people who can eat, remember, speak, build, and teach children the names of what came before. Because renewal without memory would be only repetition. If the new world simply forgets the old one, then Ragnarok becomes meaningless. The same fears, the same betrayals, the same failures of control could begin again under fresh leaves. But if memory survives, then the new world may carry a different wisdom, not guaranteed. The myth does not promise perfection. It offers possibility. That is why the rebirth after Ragnarok feels fragile. The earth is green, but it has emerged from catastrophe. Baldr returns, but after death. Mjolnir remains, but Thor does not. Humanity survives, but only through a narrow thread. The old order's glory is gone, and the new one has not yet proved itself. This fragility is more moving than certainty would be. A simple, happy ending would betray the scale of what has happened. The myth knows better. It allows hope, but hope with ash still in the air. It allows life, but not amnesia. It allows continuity, but not the comfort of pretending that the old world was merely a rehearsal for a better one. The renewed world is beautiful because it is not guaranteed, and perhaps that is the final transformation Ragnarok offers. Before the fire, the gods tried to preserve order by mastery. Bind the wolf, cast away the serpent, exile the daughter, punish the betrayer, gather warriors, read prophecy. After the fire, the emphasis changes. What matters is no longer control, but carrying forward. The survivors cannot dominate the past. They can only inherit it. That inheritance includes grief. It includes courage. It includes guilt. It includes the knowledge that even the strongest halls can burn. But it also includes Baldr's return, the rising earth, the surviving humans, and the possibility that meaning can pass through destruction without being destroyed by it. So the world after Ragnarok is not innocent. It is not safe in any childish sense. It is alive. And in a myth this severe, life itself is no small victory. Chapter 18. What Ragnarok was really saying. Ragnarok is often described as the end of the world, but that phrase is too simple for what the myth is doing. It is the end of a world, a particular order, a particular arrangement of power, fear, glory, compromise, and memory. Asgard burns not because the gods were weak, and not because their enemies were meaningless symbols of evil, but because the world they defended was always living under the pressure of fate. The wolf, the serpent, the dead, the trickster, the winter. All of them were part of a pattern the gods could delay, shape, and answer, but never fully escape. That is the first great truth of Ragnarok. Even gods are temporary. Not temporary in the small, ordinary way humans are, but temporary nonetheless. Their halls can shine for ages. Their names can command awe. Their weapons can hold back chaos. Their wisdom can reach into terrifying depths. And still, time finds them. Consequence finds them. The future they fear becomes the ground beneath their feet. But Ragnarok is not only a myth about death. It is also a myth about courage under conditions where courage cannot guarantee success. Odin rides to Fenrir knowing what waits. Thor faces Jormungandr and completes his duty even as venom claims him. Heimdall meets Loki, the wound Asgard never healed, and answers him at the cost of his own life. The gods do not win in the easy sense, but they do not vanish into cowardice either. That distinction matters. The myth does not say that meaning depends on survival. It does not say an action is valuable only if it prevents loss. It offers something colder and perhaps more durable. That dignity can exist even when the ending is fixed. A doomed stand is not automatically a foolish stand. Sometimes it is the only honest shape left for loyalty, responsibility, and love of a world that cannot be saved intact. Ragnarok also speaks about guilt. Again and again, the gods try to control what frightens them. They bind Fenrir through deception. They cast Jormungandr into the sea. They send hell away. They tolerate Loki until the wound becomes fatal, then chain him beneath the earth. These acts are not all senseless. Some are understandable. Some may even be necessary within the myth's harsh logic. But none of them are weightless. The story remembers. That may be the most unsettling thing about it. Ragnarok is not random destruction. It is consequence returning with a face. The old debts come due. The exiled return. The buried pain breaks the surface. The dead march. What was treated as safely outside the order comes back to reveal that it was part of the order all along. And then, after everything, the earth rises. This does not erase the tragedy. It deepens it. The renewed world matters because the old one truly died. Baldr's return matters because Baldr was truly lost. Leif and Lifthrasir matter because human life survives by a thread, not by guarantee. Hope, in this myth, is not loud. It does not swagger out of the flames claiming that suffering was only an illusion. It stands quietly in the aftermath and begins again. That may be why Ragnarok still feels powerful. It does not flatter us with permanence. It does not promise that wisdom will always save the wise, or strength will always save the strong, or love will always retrieve what death has taken. But neither does it surrender meaning to ruin. It allows the world to burn, and still asks what can be carried through the fire. Perhaps that is what the old story was really saying. Every order ends. Every power has limits. Every bond must be honored before it breaks. And when the final winter comes, whether for a person, a kingdom, a family, or a civilization, the question may not be whether we can escape the ending. The question is what kind of witness we become before it arrives. Ragnarok leaves us there, not with comfort exactly, but with a severe kind of hope. Even gods pass into memory. Even the brightest halls become ash. Yet courage, grief, guilt, and renewal survive as stories. And stories are one way meaning refuses to die. After the fire, the world is not the same. But somewhere, life begins again.